Story 1. Adolf Hitler, Germany, 1933 to 1945. He came to power legally. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany through constitutional process. No coup. No midnight seizure. Within months, emergency decrees suspended civil liberties. Opposition parties were outlawed. Power consolidated through law. The takeover was procedural. The signatures were real. What followed was not improvisation. It was construction. The evidence is exhaustive. Signed decrees ordering exclusion, relocation, and confiscation. Minutes from the Wannsee Conference outlining deportation logistics. Rail schedules coordinating arrivals at camps never designed for release. Architectural plans for facilities built for scale, not detention. The trains ran on time. The numbers matched the reports. This was not decentralized brutality. It was synchronized. Ministries coordinated with industry. Private firms supplied materials. Accountants tracked cost per prisoner. Doctors calibrated survival thresholds. Every stage was documented. And when documentation threatened exposure, it was reclassified. As defeat approached, suppression accelerated. Orders were issued to destroy files. Camp records were burned. Witnesses reassigned. Mass graves concealed. After the war, surviving officials claimed ignorance, confusion, or obedience. Everyone blamed the system. No one claimed authorship. The consequence reshaped continents. Over 6 million Jews murdered. Millions more civilians and prisoners of war eliminated. Entire communities erased so completely that no relatives remained to report them missing. One humane loss is enough to understand the scale. A family in Krakow registered 4 generations under one address in 1938. By 1945, the building stood empty. No bodies recovered. No death certificates issued. Legally, they vanished. Justice arrived unevenly. Hitler died by suicide, avoiding trial. Many architects of the system reintegrated into post-war governments, industries, and intelligence services. Accountability fragmented. Responsibility diluted. The defense was consistent inevitability. That argument fails the record. The machinery required constant decision-making. Trains could be stopped. Orders could be delayed. Deportation lists could be altered. At every stage, continuation was chosen. The process required consent, and it received it. This case matters because it established a template. Mass death executed through bureaucracy. Moral distance engineered through paperwork. Atrocities disguised as administration. Later regimes would study it. Some openly, others quietly. The lesson was not how to kill, but how to authorize killing without personal exposure. And the cost was not only lives. It was precedent. The death toll surpassed 8 figures, and the method spread. Story 2. Joseph Stalin, Soviet Union, 1928 to 1953. He did not need spectacle. He needed lists. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin consolidated power quietly. Rivals were outmaneuvered, reassigned, or erased through internal party mechanisms. By the late 1920s, control was total, not through charisma, but through administration. Terror became clerical. Violence became routine. The core instrument was the state security apparatus. Arrests were not random. They were planned. Targets were categorized: former elites, military officers, intellectuals, peasants, even loyal party members. Each category carried numerical expectations. The evidence survived because it was too extensive to fully destroy. NKVD execution orders. Transport manifests to labor camps. Internal memos discussing capacity limits. And most telling, execution quotas, issued in 1937, specifying how many people each region was required to eliminate. The quotas had signatures. They were enforced. Local officials did not ask whether accusations were true. They asked whether targets had been met. Confessions were extracted mechanically. Trials lasted minutes. Sentences were predetermined. The Gulag system absorbed millions, many never to return. The state then intervened again to suppress the consequences. Census data from 1937 revealed catastrophic population losses. The results were declared invalid. Statisticians were arrested. A new census was ordered with revised methodology. The demographic gap remained, but the explanation was erased. Numbers disappeared. People did not. The consequences extended beyond death. Families of the accused were reclassified as threats. Children were sent to state institutions. Wives were imprisoned under guilt by association statutes. Entire bloodlines were marked. One humane loss captures the mechanism. In Kiev, a railway engineer was arrested during a night sweep. His crime was never specified. His wife was sentenced to 8 years for knowing him. Their 2 sons were reassigned new identities. They never reunited. No record explains why. After Stalin's death, partial admissions emerged. Some victims were rehabilitated on paper. Files were quietly corrected. But no comprehensive accounting occurred. Many mass graves remain unmarked. Death estimates vary, not because they are unknown, but because they are politically sensitive. Responsibility was deflected upward and downward simultaneously. Officials claimed they followed orders. Stalin claimed he protected the state. The system absorbed blame until it dissolved. This case matters because it introduced numerical killing as policy. Death was no longer an outcome. It was a target. And once killing becomes a metric, escalation is inevitable. Later regimes would adopt the same logic, sometimes with different language, sometimes with the same paperwork. The files from 1937 remain partially sealed. They still list numbers. Classified death totals were revised upward, decades too late. Story 3. And Mao Zedong People's Republic of China 1958 to 1962. The famine was not sudden. It was reported and ignored. In 1958, Mao Zedong launched the Great Leap Forward, a nationwide campaign to transform China into an industrial power almost overnight. Communes replaced farms. Backyard furnaces replaced factories. Production targets were set without regard for soil, climate, or human limits. The policy was absolute. The warnings were immediate. Internal reports showed crop failures within months. Local officials documented starvation. Grain stores were empty. Yet higher-level reports told a different story. Production figures were falsified, inflated to meet political expectations. Paper harvests replaced real food. The numbers looked strong. The villages were starving. The evidence exists in fragments that escaped erasure. Party memos acknowledging shortages. Provincial correspondence requesting relief. Burial records at spike while population reports remain stable. Cadres privately admitting failure and publicly denying it. The mechanism was simple. Officials who reported bad news were punished. Those who reported success were promoted. The system selected for deception. As false reports climbed the hierarchy, requisition quotas increased. Grain was exported or stockpiled while people collapsed in the fields. Silence was rewarded. Truth was interdicted. Suppression followed the deaths. Travel between regions was restricted to prevent visibility. Speech was criminalized as counter-revolutionary. Researchers were barred from archives. Families were told starvation was a natural disaster, not a policy outcome. The consequences were historic. Tens of millions died. Exact numbers remain contested, not because data is absent, but because access is restricted. The demographic scar is visible decades later in age pyramids that never normalize. One humane loss reveals a scale without abstraction. In Anhui province, a schoolteacher documented the disappearance of his class over one winter. By spring, only 3 students remained. He was later disciplined for spreading pessimism. The children were never recorded as deceased. After the famine, no public reckoning occurred. The policy was quietly reframed as an error in enthusiasm. Responsibility diffused across committees. Mao remained in power. The reporting system that enabled the catastrophe was never dismantled. This case matters because it proves mass death can occur without executions. No camps were required. No firing squads. Only enforced dishonesty and continued extraction. The pattern mirrors earlier cases. Numerical targets override reality. Data becomes ideological. Correction becomes dangerous. And the same mechanism does not need cruelty to function. It only needs compliance. Later, the process would repeat, with new campaigns and familiar outcomes. The reports would change wording. The structure would not. Mortality estimates exceed 30 million. Archives remain restricted. Story 4. King Leopold II Belgium/Congo Free State 1885 to 1908. There was no war zone. There was a balance sheet. In 1885, King Leopold II of Belgium acquired control of the Congo Free State, not as a colony, but as his personal property. The arrangement was legalized through international treaties and humanitarian rhetoric. On paper, it was a civilizing mission. The language promised protection. The reality required terror. The system was built for extraction. Rubber quotas were imposed on villages with no means to meet them. Failure was punished systematically. Hostages were taken. Whippings normalized. Amputation became enforcement. Severed hands were collected as proof that ammunition had not been wasted. The quotas were measured. The penalties were ritualized. The evidence survives because outsiders documented it before suppression could fully succeed. Missionary photographs. Testimonies from traders. Company ledgers correlating profit spikes with population collapse. Internal correspondence acknowledging excessive force and approving it anyway. Leopold ruled from Europe. Orders flowed downward. Violence flowed upward as profit. When reports of abuse reached European newspapers, suppression activated. Public relations campaigns reframed atrocities as exaggeration. Critics were sued. Journalists discredited. Parliamentary inquiries were delayed or weakened. For years, economic gain outweighed human cost. The press was managed. The killings continued. The consequences were demographic devastation. Entire regions depopulated. Birth rates collapsed. Estimates range from 5 to 10 million dead, not through battle, but through forced labor, famine, disease, and punishment. One humane loss captures the system. A Congolese child had his hand severed after his village failed to meet rubber quotas. His father had already been executed as an example. The child survived, missing a limb, carrying proof of compliance for a crime he did not commit. Eventually, international pressure forced a transfer of control from Leopold to the Belgian state. No criminal trial occurred. No personal accountability was assigned. Leopold died wealthy, honored, and legally unblemished. The defense was economic necessity. Civilization. Progress. The records contradict it. Profit margins rose as population fell. Violence was not incidental. It was operational. This case matters because it demonstrates corporate-scale evil without ideology. No revolution. No racial manifesto required. Only demand, distance, and deniability. It also establishes a critical precedent. Mass death can be invisible when it occurs far from power, and immensely profitable. That lesson would not be forgotten. Population loss measured in millions, accountability measured in zero. Story 5, Pol Pot, Cambodia, 1975 to 1979. The cities were emptied in days. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge seized Phnom Penh and immediately ordered a total evacuation. Hospitals were cleared. Schools abandoned. Families marched into the countryside under the claim of temporary relocation. The return never came. The clock stopped. The cities died. Pol Pot's vision was absolute agrarian purity. Money was abolished. Religion banned. Education criminalized. Anyone associated with urban life, foreign languages, or professional skill was marked as a threat. Society was to be reset to year zero. The evidence is direct and preserved. Prison logs from Tuol Sleng S-21. Confession records extracted under torture. Execution photographs. Mass graves later uncovered across the countryside. This was not decentralized chaos. It was documented elimination. Names were recorded. Deaths were scheduled. The suppression was international and political. During the Cold War, the regime was shielded by geopolitical convenience. Intelligence agencies knew. Aid routes continued. After the fall, records were scattered, delayed, or ignored. Years passed before tribunals began. The world hesitated. People disappeared. The consequences were catastrophic. An estimated 1/4 of Cambodia's population died in less than 4 years. Teachers, doctors, engineers erased. Cultural memory collapsed. Survivors inherited a country without institutions. One humane loss reveals the logic. A teenage girl was executed after guards noticed she wore glasses. No accusation followed. Education alone marked her as incompatible with the new order. Her family was forced to continue working the fields beside her burial site. Some argue the deaths were the result of mismanagement and famine rather than intent, but the prison records show systematic targeting and execution orders. After the regime fell, Accountability arrived slowly and incompletely. Pol Pot died without facing trial. Many cadres reintegrated into local power structures. Justice, when it came, was selective and late. This case matters because it proves ideology can compress genocide into years, not decades. No advanced bureaucracy was required. Only total control, isolation, and obedience. It also marks a shift. Killing was no longer hidden behind administration alone. It was justified as purification. Survival itself became suspicious. By this point, the pattern is no longer merging. It is repeating. And the scale is no longer theoretical. Nearly 25% of the population eliminated in under 4 years. Story 6. Heinrich Himmler, Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. He did not give speeches. He built systems. Heinrich Himmler rose not as a demagogue, but as an organizer. As head of the SS, he transformed a paramilitary group into a parallel state, complete with courts, police, intelligence, and an independent economy. His power did not rely on charisma. It relied on structure. The chain of command was clean. The outcomes were lethal. Himmler's role was not ideological authorship, but operational control. He oversaw the concentration camp network, the Einsatzgruppen mobile killing units, and later the mechanized extermination facilities. Orders flowed through him. Reports returned to him. The evidence is unambiguous. Inspection notes written in his hand. Procurement records for Zyklon B. Personnel evaluations praising efficiency in special actions. Correspondence discussing corpse disposal capacity as a logistical constraint. The tone was managerial. The content was murder. Suppression was engineered through fragmentation. Responsibility was divided across departments. Each official handled only a segment: transport, guarding, accounting, disposal. No single desk appeared to own the whole process. Moral distance was not accidental. It was designed. When questions arose, Himmler emphasized discipline and duty. When morale faltered, he reframed killing as burden-bearing service. In a 1943 speech to SS officers, he acknowledged mass murder openly, then demanded silence and loyalty. They were told it was necessary. They were told never to speak. The consequences extended beyond victims. Perpetrators were psychologically conditioned. Guards rotated to prevent empathy. Promotions rewarded compliance. Families of SS men lived off benefits funded by confiscated property. One humane loss captures a corrosion. A camp guard wrote to his wife describing nightmares and nausea. He requested reassignment. The request was denied. Months later, his letters stopped. His unit was commended for performance. After the war, Himmler attempted to disappear. He was captured and died by suicide before trial. His death eliminated a central witness. Many subordinates claimed ignorance, citing compartmentalization, a defense made plausible by the system itself. This case matters because it demonstrates how genocide becomes sustainable, not through hatred alone, but through organizational design. Killing scaled because it was made routine, rewarded, and abstracted. Himmler did not invent mass murder. He optimized it. And optimization travels. Later regimes would not copy the symbols. They would copy the structure. Genocide refined into procedure and exported as method. Story 7. Hideki Tojo, Imperial Japan, 1937 to 1948. The atrocities were not rumors. They were filed. Hideki Tojo rose through the Japanese military as a disciplinarian and administrator. By 1941, he was prime minister, overseeing a wartime government that fused political authority with military command. Expansion was framed as necessity. Dissent was framed as betrayal. The orders were formal. The denials came later. The evidence survived unevenly, but enough remains. POW mortality rates that exceeded any Western theater. Field reports describing special handling of prisoners. Medical logs from Unit 731, where human experimentation was conducted under military oversight, without anesthesia, without consent, without survival. The subjects were numbered. The results were archived. Suppression began before the war ended. As defeat approached, documents were destroyed. Witnesses were reassigned. After surrender, a second layer of suppression followed. Diplomatic. The United States granted immunity to key researchers from Unit 731 in exchange for biological warfare data. Testimony was sealed. Evidence excluded from the Tokyo trials. Victims were never informed that their suffering had been monetized as intelligence. Crimes were traded. Records were buried. The consequences were permanent silence for thousands. Chinese civilians, Korean laborers, Allied prisoners, many died anonymously. Families received no notification. Medical ethics were set back decades by the normalization of human experimentation under state authority. One humane loss exposes a cost. A captured Allied airman was transferred to a research facility instead of a prison camp. His name was removed from POW rolls. His family received notice that he was missing in action. He was dissected while conscious. No grave exists. Tojo was tried and executed in 1948, but his conviction did not encompass the full scope of the crimes. Those who designed and conducted the experiments lived freely, published papers, and held academic positions. This case matters because it shows how victory determines memory. Accountability was selective. Atrocity was weighed against utility. Some crimes were prosecuted. Others were absorbed into post-war science. The pattern is now unmistakable. When perpetrators possess information deemed valuable, justice becomes negotiable. And when justice is negotiable, repetition becomes likely. War crimes exchanged for data. Prosecution narrowed by strategy. Story 8. Lavrentiy Beria, Soviet Union, 1938 to 1953. He did not create the terror. He perfected it. Lavrentiy Beria assumed control of the Soviet security apparatus at the height of the purges. By then, mass arrest was normalized. What Beria introduced was efficiency, fewer errors, faster processing, cleaner numbers. Fear was standardized. Violence became optimized. The evidence is bureaucratic and damning. Interrogation manuals emphasizing speed. Arrest quotas refined by category. Execution orders signed in batches. Internal reviews criticizing officers not for brutality, but for inefficiency. And then there are the signatures. The 1937 execution quotas, first issued under Stalin, reappear in Beria's files. Same language. Same numerical logic. Different administrator. Requests for increases approved without investigation. Regional commanders competing to exceed targets. The numbers escalated. The paperwork matched. Suppression under Beria was absolute. Confessions were fabricated to retroactively justify arrests. Families were reclassified as accomplices. Appeals were prohibited. Records were sealed under national security statutes that outlived the victims by decades. Sexual violence was folded into the system. Beria used his position to abduct women, many never seen again. Complaints were intercepted. Files disappeared. Terror extended beyond ideology into personal predation. There was no appeal. There was no witness. The consequences reached into every layer of society. Scientists disappeared mid-project. Military officers vanished before inspections. Entire apartment blocks were emptied overnight. The state functioned, but hollowed. One humane loss exposes a method. A Moscow engineer was arrested during a quota surge. His interrogation lasted 12 minutes. He was executed that night. His wife was told he had been reassigned. She waited 17 years before learning the truth from a partially unsealed index card. After Stalin's death, Beria briefly positioned himself as a reformer. He released prisoners, publicly condemned excesses, many of which he had administered. Within months, he was arrested by his own colleagues. His trial was secret. His execution immediate. Files sealed again. This case matters because it completes the loop. Killing no longer required ideological fervor. It required administrative continuity. The terror survived leadership changes because the mechanism was intact. And here, the pattern pays off. The same quotas. The same falsified reports. Different regimes. Same mathematics. By this point, coincidence is no longer plausible. It is a system. Execution quotas reused. Signatures consistent across purges. Story 9. And Mao Zedong's second phase. People's Republic of China 1966 to 1976. The warnings had already been written. They were ignored again. By 1966, Mao Zedong knew the cost of ideological campaigns. The famine had been documented internally. Demographers had warned of collapse. Party officials had quietly pleaded for restraint. Then the Cultural Revolution began. The records were clear. The orders resumed. This phase was not economic experimentation. It was political purification. Mao mobilized youth militias, the Red Guards, and directed them against teachers, officials, parents, and historians. Authority was inverted. Accusation replaced evidence. Loyalty replaced competence. The evidence mirrors the earlier disaster. Internal party communications acknowledging social breakdown. Reports of suicide spikes among intellectuals. Local cadres warning that violence was uncontrollable, followed by reprimands for pessimism. And again, the mechanism returned. Falsified reports. Schools claimed compliance while teachers were beaten. Factories claimed output while managers were killed. Regions claimed stability while bodies filled stadiums. The reports never changed. Suppression was immediate and total. Archives were sealed. Personal diaries confiscated. Public memory rewritten. Families were instructed to denounce their own members or share their fate. Silence became proof of survival. Speech became evidence. Memory became a crime. The consequences compounded the earlier catastrophe. An entire generation lost education. Research halted. Cultural heritage destroyed. Suicide and execution blurred together in official tallies. Deaths were reclassified as incidents. Responsibility dissolved into revolutionary fervor. One humane loss reveals a final erosion. A university professor was forced to kneel before his students during a struggle session. His daughter was ordered to participate. She refused. Both were beaten. He died that night. She was sent to the countryside and never returned to education. No record lists his death. After Mao's death, partial admissions surfaced. Excesses were acknowledged abstractly. No comprehensive accounting followed. The same justification was offered as before: misinterpretation, overzealous followers, historical necessity. The defense fails comparison. The same reporting structure produced the same outcome. The same incentives punished truth. The same silence followed. This case matters because it removes the last excuse. Foreknowledge existed. Precedent existed. Alternatives existed. Continuation was chosen anyway. At this point, the pattern is complete. Numbers over lives. Reports over reality. Stability over truth. And once repetition is visible, denial becomes impossible. Identical falsified reports. 2 campaigns. 1 mechanism. Millions dead. Story 10. Adolf Eichmann, Nazi Germany, 1939 to 1962. He never pulled a trigger. He moved people. Adolf Eichmann was not a senior ideologue. He was a mid-level administrator. His authority came from logistics, schedules, permits, rail coordination. He described his role as technical, necessary, neutral. The job was transportation. The destination was death. Eichmann oversaw the deportation of Jews from across Europe to ghettos and extermination camps. He coordinated with ministries, rail companies, and foreign governments. His success was measured in throughput. Delays were corrected. Bottlenecks optimized. The evidence comes from his own words. Transport lists, memos calculating train capacity, testimony from his trial in Jerusalem, where he spoke calmly, precisely, and without visible remorse. He knew the outcome. He managed the flow. Suppression operated through banality. Eichmann claimed he followed orders. He emphasized hierarchy. He insisted decisions were made above him. The defense was not denial, it was dilution. After the war, Eichmann escaped. He lived quietly in Argentina for years under an assumed name. No investigation pursued him aggressively. He worked. He raised a family. The system moved on. The file stayed dormant. Time did the hiding. When Israeli agents captured him in 1960, the trial exposed something new. Not a monster. A functionary. Someone disturbingly ordinary. The court rejected his defense. Following orders was not absolution. Administration did not erase intent. One humane loss reframes the abstraction. A Hungarian family of 5 was deported on a single train Eichmann approved in 1944. The parents were killed on arrival. 2 children died within weeks. One survived alone and testified at the trial 16 years later. Eichmann was executed in 1962. His conviction reshaped international law. It established that bureaucratic participation in mass murder is itself a crime. This case matters because it removes the final refuge. Evil does not require hatred. It does not require fanaticism. It requires participation. And participation scales best when it looks like work. Here, the pattern turns outward The previous stories show leaders, architects, enforcers. Eichmann shows a connective tissue, the clerks, managers, analysts who make systems lethal without ever seeing blood. Remove them, and the system collapses. Ignore them, and the system survives its leaders. That is the final warning. The system outlived the men and still waits to be reused.